to see what are the various nodes, the various epistemes, the various themes, the various issues that talk about science fiction. Okay, so I hope you remember the earlier experiment that we engaged in about the curious case of the vanishing bottle, in which an object goes from position A to position B within the blink of an eye. How do you define it? How do you describe it? Right? What actually happens, right? Now, this is the interesting point, is that in speculative, imaginations, in speculative writing, science fiction is usually conflated with two other genres, fantasy and mythology. But then what is the basic difference between science fiction, fantasy, mythology? The very basic difference is the language of how you describe a phenomena taking place. It all comes down to the epistemology of description of what you witnessed, right? For example, science fiction would say that an object, this particular bottle, in this case, moved from point A to point B because of, this new technology that can displace matter from point A to point B within an eyelid, this nuclear-powered or fission-powered or fusion-powered technology that can break an object into its constituent atoms and then take them to a different place. If you write it like this, of course, this is science fiction. But if you were to say, okay, what I just saw on screen wasn't really science, it was magic. What really happened was that this magician somehow made this object, disappear from position A and reappear at position B because of magic. Then, what you are doing essentially is writing fantasy. However, if some of you were to say that no, what we witnessed wasn't either science or magic, this was a result of the will of a divine being saying that, I want this bottle not at point A, but at point B. And I just said it, and it was, right? So in that case, what you would be doing is engaging with mythology. And these are very, basic, this is a very basic differentiation. And if I were to give you examples, and if I were to translate this into terms of other phenomena, something like this. All these three, they become what is called speculative fiction, and other genres too. But these three, fantasy, mythology, science fiction, it's primarily about speculative fiction, because if you see in science fiction, it's like Star Trek's transporter, in which you have an object going from point A to point B. In fantasy, you have Harry Potter using, apparition of flu powder to go from point A to point B. In mythology, it's the Bifrost, bridge of Thor, in which he goes from point A to point B. So essentially, the phenomena that we witness and the phenomena that is happening is the same. It's the same thing that is happening. The only difference is how it is described. What are the words that you use? What is the epistemology to which you ascribe this phenomena? Why is this happening, and how you describe it determines what is called science fiction, fantasy, or mythology, right? So speculative fiction genres are not just about what happens, but how it happens. That is the way it is described. When I say this, I also would like to point out that in today's world, or perhaps in any world, in any time, when people write, they don't just write good science fiction stories. They don't just write good, mythological tales. They don't just write fantasy narratives. What they write are good stories or stories. Now it is up to us about how we classify, how we tag, how we catalog these different narratives that are around us into various genres. Some of you might like to do it. Some of you may be wary of that. Whatever works for you, go ahead, do it. But if I were to talk about SF now, today, especially, the idea of science fiction and fantasy is being fused to such an extent that we have a new category called SFF, science fiction and fantasy. So now SF and F are not just two hermetically sealed units. They are somehow units which come together, complement each other, and that particular genre is called SFF, science fiction and fantasy. Notable examples from India are, of course, Samit Basu, Gautam Bhatia. Just to cite just two examples who are not just engaging with science fiction, who are not just engaging with fantasy, but they are trying to bring science fiction and fantasy together, right? But this presentation in specific is going to be about science fiction and not speculative fiction, that is the other three, nor about SFF, science fiction and fantasy. So I'm going to talk primarily about SF, science fiction. I hope it is clear. And so this is going to be sort of the plan for today. We're going to talk a little bit about definitions of science fiction. We're going to talk about the history of Indian science fiction. We're going to talk a bit about texts and themes of Indian science fiction. And if you want, we can talk a little bit about writing science fiction. So this is going to be overall plan for the next, 45 or 50 minutes. And then we can maybe open up and talk and just discuss questions or just discuss, points. Okay. Can I move on? Is this okay till now?
Yes, sir.
Yes, fine. You can proceed further.
Okay, thank you. Right. So, what is science fiction? I mean, this is a question that still remains unanswered because thousands and thousands of perspectives have been written. But then, what is science fiction? I mean, but then we have to start somewhere. So let's start at the very basics, right? So Hugo Gernsback in, say, the 1920s or 30s, he came up with this concept called science fiction, and he says science fiction is 75% literature, 25% science, right? So it needs to have a little bit of science, but 75% it has to be, like literature. The great Isaac Asimov said that science fiction is a branch of literature. It's a kind of literature that deals with the reactions and responses of human beings to changes in science and technology, right? Think of it this way. Suppose, has this ever occurred to you that you're reading a book, a hard copy, and you're sitting in your balcony, sipping tea, and reading a book? Okay, I think somebody left their mic on. Can you please switch it off?
No, मम्मी ने तो मेरा भाई अपनी
Can I request the individual who has left their mic on by mistake to please? Yes, thank you so much. Okay, back. So, what was I saying? Oh yes. So this is going to happen to me a lot. I just lose my thought. So it's okay. Please deal with me. Okay. Yeah. So science fiction deals with the reactions of human beings to changes in science and tech. Yes. So you are sitting on your balcony with a cup of chai, reading a book, a hard copy, and then you just want to sort of, focus on a particular word. Do you actually do this? Do you actually reach out and touch the book with your two fingers and you try to zoom in or zoom out the way you do on a cell phone? I did it a couple of times, and I was so frustrated when that text did not zoom out, when that text did not magnify. And then I realized that being on a cell phone has contoured my motor functions to such a limit that I expect even hard copy to perform the same way as I expect a digital copy to perform, right? So these little things, that we get used to, they are somehow changing the way we interact with this world. And that is one of the fundamental, principles of science fiction, that the way that we engage with our external reality, the way we engage with material reality, the way we engage with the world around us is somehow contoured by the technological edifices around us, right? So this is one such definition. Then Brooks Landon talks about SF as the literature that considers the impact of science and tech on humanity, somewhat drawing on from Asimov. Christopher Evans says that it is the literature of what if. Now, this is again a very important question, that what if this were to happen? What if that were not to happen? What if this thing comes alive? What if this thing does not exist? What if this thing exists, right? So this question of what if, what is going to happen if? And then you try to create a narrative, then you come up with what is going to happen. But then, question. Is science fiction the only genre that speculates and creates alternate worlds? Is science fiction the only genre that talks about what if? Is science fiction the only genre that speculates in a way that you have to change and actively change external reality in your mind and then create a narrative out of it? Perhaps not, because, well, fantasy does something similar. It also says what if. Mythology also does something similar. It says what if. Even horror does something similar. What if? What if this lizard in front of you on a wall were to become 200 times its size? So it's also doing the same thing. So, perhaps all of these genres are engaging with this question of what if. So maybe this definition as a starting point is great, like all the other definitions, but then we need to fine tune it. Then we shift to what is Indian science fiction. This again is a question that has no answer. Then I'm just sort of going to run by you a few perspectives of approaching Indian science fiction. Is science fiction a genre that derives from India's mythic traditions or fantastic traditions? Or is science fiction a Western genre that has been recently adopted by Indian writers? These two questions, interestingly, lie on opposite ends of the political spectrum. So, depending on where you are across the political spectrum, you will have an answer, right? So, that means that it's going to be a subjective answer. There is no one common unified answer which all of us would agree on. The way we approach this question is going to be determined by where we stand in the political spectrum, right? So, again, we're going to come to it later, but I would suggest and I would request you to start thinking about where you would stand. Then something can be a synthesis between these two, that science fiction is actually a subset of global science fiction, which is coplanar in both spatial and temporal terms with what we call Western science fiction. Right? Or you can go the other way and say, well, science fiction is something else altogether. It's well, you can't really define it using the dialectical methodology that you have adopted here, that it's this or that. No, science fiction is not a synthesis. Science fiction is something else altogether. Again, a lot of work has been done on this, especially about science fiction as a genre. If you want, we can maybe later talk about it, or I'll be happy to give you a few references in case you want to read more about it. The two questions, the two texts that come to my mind, which I would recommend if you want to know about definitions of science fiction, are, I think, On the Origins of Genre and To Define SF or Not. So these are two essays written by Paul Kincaid and John Reeder. So you will find them on JSTOR or you will find them online. Just go and Google, and these are very solid interventions into how science fiction can be defined, in case you want to define it or in case you want to understand it. But then why India? And why Western SF? Now, James Gunn says that science fiction is occupying a more significant place in the Indian intellectual and educational circles as India is experiencing exponential technological change. And science fiction, by itself, has so much to say about the direction of that change and the way we can talk about our world, future world, for human habitability, for human survival, for anything, for space exploration, right? So that is perhaps why India and science fiction go hand in hand, like today. Some more definitions, right? Of course, this is a film we have all seen. This is a film that has been extensively written on. This is a film that has been extensively worked on, not just a commercial success, but also a critical success in the sense that a lot of people, a lot of scholars from around the world wrote about this particular film, 2003, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah. So one more way of approaching science fiction, which I think works for me, on numerous occasions, is Darko Sovin's idea of the novum, right? So this is from Metamorphosis of Science Fiction, and Darko Sovin says that novum is that historical innovation or novelty in an SF text from which the most important distinctions between the world of the tale from the world of the reader stem, right? So novum is a scientifically plausible innovation that catalyzes an imaginary historical transformation. I am quoting Istvan Chicheri Rone Jr., which you see on your screen right now. So basically what Darko Sovin says that science fiction needs a novum, right? If science fiction is all about cognitive estrangement, that is the word he uses. If science fiction is all about cognitive estrangement, that novum is the mechanism through which that cognitive estrangement is achieved. Now, what is cognitive estrangement? It is a statement of a different, kind that, okay, this thing, this phenomena, this idea, this being, I know it, but I don't know it. And the tension between you knowing it and not knowing it, that is cognitive estrangement, and that is achieved by the novum. Novum, basically, the technological innovation or discovery because of which the world of the text becomes different from the world of the reader, right? So in this case, novum can be first contact, novum can be alien intervention, right? If you have a story about a scientist that creates a device that turns biscuits into gold, that is the novum, that particular device, that particular machine that transmogrifies, whatever, biscuits into gold is the novum. And then you write about what the machine is and what, how it came to be and what is the impact of that machine on the society as such. That is science fiction. Some more definitions, right? Norman Spinrad says that, well, science fiction is anything published as science fiction. Because, well, you have so many themes across, and, well, there's no common unifying thread. I mean, so how can you say that text A is science fiction and also text B is science fiction, whereas text A and B have nothing in common? So anything published as science fiction is science fiction now. Now, I think Paul Kincaid, the critic I was referring to earlier, he talks about family resemblances, the Wittgensteinian family resemblances to link different kinds of science fiction. As I said, you can read the essay if you're, interested. But what we arrive at and what we can say, science fiction is not really a genre. It's not really a genre. It's a mode. And when I say science fiction is not a genre, it's because, well, you have these genres, right? You have mystery, romance, horror, action, thrill, suspense. These are all genres. But if you see science fiction, somehow all these genres are going to be activated. If you look at Koi Mil Gaya itself, it has mystery, it has romance, it has horror, it has action, it has thrill, it has suspense, and then you call it science fiction. So, well, a better way of approaching this entire debate of whether something is science fiction or not is just to say that science fiction is not really a genre, but a mode that somehow fuses and hybridizes other genres, right? So this is one, again, you can, of course, start cross questioning this too by saying that, well, okay, if science fiction is a mode, then so is mystery, then so is romance. Of course, you can do that. And that is precisely the point why we need to consistently engage with genre and its boundaries and look at and find new ways of reorienting how we approach literary works or cultural production out there. So, but then one more question, arises. We talked about Koi Mil Gaya. Some of you who have seen Steven Spielberg's Extraterrestrial, E.T., would say, you know what? KMG, Koi Mil Gaya, is actually a derivative of Steven Spielberg's Extraterrestrial. For those of you who have seen Aryaman, Mukesh Khanna starrer, it aired right after Shaktiman. You might say, okay, well, Star Wars is a direct copy. Aryaman is a direct copy of Star Wars. Lightsabers, Jedis, everything. So is SF really that alien to India? I mean, aren't we just merely copying what we see in the Western Hemisphere, in the global North? We're just, copying it. Well, that's a difficult question, and that is a question that has no easy answers. But this is a question worth asking, and this is a question worth pursuing. But then, to those of you who say that, well, science fiction is just something we copy from Hollywood. Well, the interesting aspect, I'm sure that many of you might know this, that Extraterrestrial, arguably, is derived from Satyajit Ray's Alien, which was a screenplay he wrote in the 1970s, if I'm not mistaken, for Columbia Pictures. It was supposed to be a film. It was never made, even though the contract was signed, and Satyajit Ray wrote this screenplay based on, Bonkur Babu, Bonkur Babu Bondhu, the friend, Bonkur Babu's friend. This was a short story in Bangla, I think again 70s, based on this, the screenplay, based on which the film Alien was to be made, but then it never was, and 10 to 12 years later, voila, we have Extraterrestrial. And then 20 years after Extraterrestrial, 25 years after Extraterrestrial, we have Koi Mil Gaya. So you don't know who's borrowing from what, but what we can agree on is that science fiction is much more global than we can think. Now, back to the question that I had shared with you. That is science fiction a recent import or is science fiction an eternal possession? Right. So you have two different kinds of perspectives. Okay, some might say, you know what, science fiction is something we only started using as late as the 1990s or maybe the early 2000s. That is when science fiction actually started in this country. Some of you might say, well, you know what? No, that is not true because science fiction is our eternal possession. Because, well, if you look at our ancient epics, if you look at our classical epics, then the Brahmastras were nuclear weapons, right? So, since we had nuclear weapons at that time, we had science at that time, and therefore, what we have been doing for the past 4,000 years is science fiction. No, this is a very tricky question, and both of these points are very good political points, as in, if you are out seeking votes, then these are questions that can give you votes. But then, as research scholars and as readers, we are not driven by political impulses. We are driven by impulses to find Gyan, to find Satya. And in that case, we have to look at data. And we have to look at data not just from our specific political, like our political positioning, but what the data says. And the data is what is going to speak to you today, and then you can decide on where you want to stand. Because these two, as I said, these two questions, so whether science fiction is a very recent import and we just copy the West, or science fiction is something we've always had all across time, they're very politically charged questions. These are not mere academic questions. They are political questions. But we're going to find academic answers because, as I said, we are not politicians. We are going to look for data and see where the data leads us. So let's discuss a little bit of history of Indian science fiction. Just for the reference, in the Western Hemisphere, in the Francophone world, in the Anglophone world, Frankenstein is considered one of the first science fiction texts, right? Some people take it back to Thomas More's Utopia 1516, I think, but then, well, Frankenstein is a much more concrete example of science fiction. This is Frankenstein is, I think, 1818 or 1819, if I'm not mistaken. If somebody knows the exact dates, then they can please share. I think it's 1818, right? And then you have, Jules Verne, as Professor Sayal also talked about, H.G. Wells. They're also, writing in this period called 1860s, 70s, 80s. Time Machine, for example, H.G. Wells' Time Machine is, I think, 1895. And the 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea is, again, 1870 something, right? From, if I'm not mistaken. So that is a time when SF is actually being produced in what we call the global north, right? Let's see about India, about when India is producing science fiction. And interestingly, India is a wonderful land of diversity and polyphony. So there are so many languages, so many cultures, so many ideas that engage with science fiction. And so we have, I think, 22 official languages alone as per the 8th schedule of the Indian Constitution, right? And these are just the tip of the iceberg. We have hundreds of more languages across the country in which not only communication happens, but also cultural production happens, right? And we don't know many of those languages. In fact, most of us speak only one or at max 2 or 3 languages, right? And that means that we are cut off from other languages and what is happening in other languages. And translations are not really happening the way they should be happening, especially in science fiction. I don't know about other genres, but in science fiction, say a story being written in Tamil isn't always being translated into Hindi or English so that other readers can read. Some work is happening, some excellent work, yes, of course, is happening, but then when compared to the overall qualitative output and quantitative output, translations don't really give us much to work on, right? So I'm going to talk about only 3 languages in terms of history. I'm just going to talk about Hindi, Bangla, and Indian English, right? These 3 languages in terms of history. And clearly, if you see the screen right now, you can see that Hindi, for example, has Ashcharya Vritant, 1884, Chandraloki Yatra, 1900. Bangla has Shukra Brahman, 1879. It has Rahasya, 1886. it has Paltak Tufan, 1896. In terms of Indian English, you have a Journal of 48 Hours of the year 1945, published in 1835. S.C. Dutt's The Republic of Orissa, 1845, and Hussein's Sultana Stream, 1905. So what you see, if you transpose this data with the kind of conception we have of SF being produced in the global north, you will realize that this is almost the same time that SF is being produced in the Francophone world or in the Anglophone world. So it's not as if we have recently started using science fiction. Well, of course, as of now, the recent boom of Indian science fiction that we witness, especially in India's Anglophone science fiction, comes to us post-2000s, post-2000. In fact, Calcutta Chromosome 1996 and Harvest 1997 were sort of, like they were precursors to what was to follow 2001 to onwards when you have this boom. But then, even before that, we have had a tradition of science fiction from just 3 languages alone. And if you compare them with other languages, you will see that today, or for the past 20 years, 30 years, 40 years, excellent work is being done in India's other languages such as Marathi, in which you have Bal Phondke, Jain Narlikar, languages such as, I just said, in Tamil, you have Sujata, who's doing excellent work. In Assamese, Professor D.C. Goswami, writing. In Bangla, Premendra Mitra, Satyajit Ray, right? So excellent work is being done in other languages. But then, since we don't know those languages, somebody who speaks Hindi may not speak Marathi, somebody who speaks Marathi may not speak Tamil, somebody who speaks Tamil may not speak Bangla, somebody who speaks Bangla may not speak Urdu, right? So you have this sort of, link. Somebody who speaks Punjabi may not speak, say Odia. So you have these interstitial spaces between which texts fall, but then that doesn't mean that if something is untranslated, it doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. Of course it exists. It's us. It's me as a researcher or as a reader who's unable to access that because of my own linguistic incompetence, because I don't speak that language. It's got nothing to do with the genre, nothing to do with what is happening in that genre, everything to do with me not knowing that language, right? So if you see this history, you will realize that the genre is global, that Indian SF is being produced at the same time that it was coming of age in other parts of the world, right? And with this, I move on to sort of a little bit more of the history and the evolution of not just Indian SF but global science fiction. And I turn to, of course, Dr. Bal Phondke. And by the way, this is a suggestion. Please read this 1993 book edited by Dr. Bal Phondke called "It Happened Tomorrow," as you see on your screen. And this sort of categorization is taken from the preface of that book, in which Dr. Bal Phondke talks about the 4 stages of the evolution of global science fiction. So "It Happened Tomorrow" is basically a collection of stories that have been translated into English from various Indian languages. So you have Marathi stories, you have stories in Kannada, you have stories in Bangla, like stories from different languages, stories from Hindi. I think it contains so in terms of Hindi, for example, you have Dr. Arvind Mishra who's writing, you have Devendra Mewadi. Now, I don't know much about this because I work primarily on Anglophone science fiction, so I will focus on Anglophone science fiction, but that doesn't mean that excellent, fantastic work is not being done in other Indian languages. So you just choose whatever language you want to work on, and or like whichever language you want to read, and go and you can find awesome books on that. Just Google. Google is our best friend. Well, until it turns sentient and goes all Terminator and destroys life on this planet. Until that thing happens, until the AI rises, until then, this is our best friend. Okay, so yes, so he talks about there being proto-science fiction, something that comes before science fiction. Then he says, so this is like the 19th century. Then comes the 1920s and 30s, and he says that this is the age of science fiction in which science is slightly important. This was the age spearheaded by Hugo Gernsback and John Campbell, pulp magazine's golden age of science fiction. So this is happening in 1910s, 20s, 30s, right? But then he talks about social science fiction. That is the third stage, which begins post-Second World War, which explores the social ramifications of science, because 1945 is when Hiroshima and Nagasaki happened. Till then, science was awesome. Science was good. Science was a Caesar capable of doing no wrong. Science was something that was going to solve all our problems. But then, as the First World War hinted, that all science was doing was creating newer ways to kill each other. And by the Second World War, we realized that yes, science was now creating ways to kill each other with such an intensity that there was no going back. We had the atom bombs of 1945. So that is when science fiction actually starts questioning the idea of science itself, and it starts to explore the social ramifications of what science and technology is doing to our society, right? And then you have the fourth shift from hard science fiction to soft science fiction. That is from, if you don't talk about the science of it as much as you talk about the impact of it, and perhaps in an aesthetic way. So this is like the literary science fiction. This is like the new wave science fiction, which we see from the 1960s onwards in the West, right? So where Indian SF is currently, I think it's somewhere between social science fiction and literary science fiction. So stages 3 and 4. Indian SF, various narratives from Indian science fiction today are swinging between stages 3 and stages 4, right? So in social science fiction, you may have people who are questioning the ramifications of science, such as Shobhan Chaudhary's The Competent Authority, or Rajat Chaudhary's The Butterfly Effect. They are questioning about what is going to happen when a particular technology comes into being, what is going to happen. Or then you have literary science fiction that may be questioning, and that is kind of questioning the impact of science, but at the same time, it is also very conscious of its form and style. It has very poetic sensibilities. It's written in a way that it's aesthetic. It's written as sort of, high literature, and not just the lowbrow literature that we usually associate with science fiction. Examples range from Priya Sarukai Chabdiya, from Vandana Singh. Again, I'm giving examples from Anglophone science fiction, who are conscious of these things. Okay, so we move on to our next slide. So in terms of current scholarship on Indian science fiction, for those of you who are interested, you may read Suparna Banerjee's Indian science fiction, Bodhisattva Chattopadhyay's Mythology articles, Pablo Mukherjee's Final Frontiers, Bhattacharya and Hiradhar's own maps, Imagined Terrains, Urvashi Kuhad's Science Fiction and Indian Women Writers. So Urvashi is going to talk to you after this session. So if you have questions about Indian women writers and science fiction, she's the one to ask, because she has literally written on that. And of course, my own Star Warriors of the Modern Raj, about which I will discuss later. So this is the existing scholarship. For those of you who might be interested, you may refer to these texts for more clarity. Suparna Banerjee works on 4 languages. Bodhisattva Chattopadhyay works on Bangla and then an overall Indian context. Pablo Mukherjee has written on Bangla. So, you have a lot of languages that are being covered, right? Hans Herder has written on Marathi science fiction. So you just need to go and sort of, go on JSTOR and you will find or just go on Google and you will find all these things, right? So now we come to our next part of this presentation, which is about texts, themes, and mediums, right? So what are the themes of Bollywood science fiction films, right? Well, if I were to say that, okay, let me talk to you about aliens in Hindi language cinema, then the earliest example that I can think of, and this is a film I absolutely love, is called Wahan Ke Log. It's a 1967 film in which we see the first dogfight. So almost 30 years, 40 years before Independence Day, you have Indian Air Force jets battling UFOs over the sky of Delhi. Right. So this is a film. This is available on YouTube, freely available on YouTube. Please go and see. It's a black and white film. Stars, Pradeep, Tanuja, Johnny Walker, right? And it's a fascinating film, right? So 1967, Aliens. 1967 is also a landmark year, watershed year, because it also has one more film called Chand Par Chadai. Now, interestingly, this film stars Dara Singh. And the way Dara Singh, who's called Captain Anand in the film, handles aliens from Moon and Mars is by wrestling with them. So our legend of Dara Singh, he actually fights the aliens doing kushti, right? So he's doing this with Martians, with space gorillas and robots, and he defeats all of them. So this is again a film that, in case you want to know more. Now, again, as I have written elsewhere, this is more about what is happening to India in the 1960s, foreign aggression, the 62 war, the 65 war, and this becomes sort of a pain, an ode to Indian masculine hero who somehow engages with external threats, as I've written elsewhere. But then the instances are clear. One more example of Alien is, of course, Joker. This is a film, 2013 film with Akshay Kumar, starring Akshay Kumar and Akshay Sinha, in which you have aliens who come to Earth, but only because the village fool goes inside a temple and prays to God, and then based on those prayers, aliens show up. And interestingly, the UFO that appears in which aliens show up is shaped exactly like a shivling, right? So again, the themes of mythology are being activated. The tropes of the mythic are being activated for like particular purposes of market success, right? We also had PK, right? So we had lots of, in Bangla, we had, I think, Patal Ghar. It was a 2003 film that again had hostile aliens, right? And of course, Koi Mil Gaya. So just to give you a, some just to refer you to some texts and themes that you may want to view or engage with. Something else is, well, technological impact of science and tech. Quoting just from Bollywood, right? You had Mission Mangal, Ra-1, Mr. India, about what happens when you have a new technology. How do you deploy that technology in the society, and what is the impact of that technology on the society at large, right? We move to one more theme, time travel. We have action replay, in which the protagonist travels back in time and ensures that his parents fall in love. Again, very reminiscent of Back to the Future, in case you have seen it. And we have Love Story 2050, in which the protagonist travels forward in time. So time travel is also there, and I'm just sort of quoting from Bollywood, because we have multiple film industries across India doing fabulous work, from Lollywood to Tollywood to Collywood, the Tamil film industry, the Bangla film industry, the Marathi film industry, the Telugu film industry, they have their own takes and they are doing absolutely wonderful work. So, but since I am limited by the language, my own language, so I'm not really able to engage with them the way I would love to engage. So I can only engage with them as just a fan, and that is, what I really am deep down, a fan of science fiction, a reader of science fiction, and that's it, because no other labels really hold. But I would like to move to Collywood, because this is a film that I saw. I mean, I saw Yantaran in Tamil, twice or thrice in the theater in Tamil, because I wanted to see, Rajni sir speak Tamil, right? So, and then of course I came back home and I saw the Hindi version, so I could understand it. But if you want to talk about robotics, artificial intelligence, well, then nothing beats Robot or Yantaran, which again had a sequel 2.0, which wasn't as good in my humble opinion as the first one, but then that is for you to decide. We also have a Hindi language web series called OK Computer, in which okay, so no spoilers, but in case you are interested, you can just go and find it out. It's called OK Computer. It's a web series about AI and the impact of AI on our society. Something else, zombies. Now again, zombies is something we say, okay, well, technically zombie is coming to us from the West, because we don't really have a zombie tradition for obvious reasons. But some films. So I'm switching between different mediums to give you a more synoptic and comprehensive overview of science fiction in India today, starting from a little bit of history, films in the 1960s, to what is happening to us today in different languages, right? So you have the English language, The Dead to India. You have the Bangla language film called Zombistan, not to be confused with Mainak Dhar's novel called Zombistan, which is an Indian English novel. So Zombistan and Zombistan, please don't confuse these two. One is a novel, one is a film. So this is a Bangla language film, a 2019 film. Then, of course, the Hindi language Go Goa Gone, which was called one of India's first Zomcom, as in zombie comedy. And this came directly at the heels of Luke and Kenny and Singh's Rise of the Zombie, which was arguably India's first zombie film. Arguably, or that is how the film was marketed. India's first zombie film, 2013. And then a few months later, we had Go Goa Gone. But Go Goa Gone is the one that is remembered more. In case you haven't seen this film, please go and see this film. It's funny. It's like a zombie comedy. Then I think in Tamil, you have Miruthan, which is a 2016 film. A sequel is also coming, in which we have zombies in Udagamandalam. In the Marathi film industry, you have Zombivli, which is a zombie film just released. I think this January. I think, yeah. So this talks about zombies in Mumbai. So you can see that, all across India, you have zombies in different parts of the country in different languages. There are some recommended viewings for you. If you want to know more about aliens or ET life, these are some films. If you want to know about AI, these are some films. Anukul is a large short film. I think it's based on a story by Satyajit Ray. And it is it's a short film, like I think 15 minutes by Shujoy Ghosh. It's available on YouTube. If you Google, you will find it. Zombies, these other texts. I did mention Betal and Zombie Ready. Yeah, right. So Zombie Ready is coming to us from Telugu. It's a film, I think primarily, like the first language of the film is Telugu. It's about zombies in Andhra Pradesh, So in case you want to know more, this is the film. Then Clones, Mutants, Genetic Engineering. This is the film. Monsters, Space Exploration. You will remember Captain Vyom. If you were a kid like me growing up in the 90s, then Captain Vyom was the thing to watch. It was like our version of Star Trek. And I absolutely loved it. I would highly recommend Captain Vyom. It's freely available on YouTube. If you have the time, please do check it out. It stars Milind Soman and all the other supermodels of that time, and it's very well directed. I mean, from the perspective of, say, a 16-year-old at least. I mean, which I kind of was at that time. Then, Indonesia also talks about CVR and NBC warfare, nuclear, biological, chemical warfare, which is now called CBRN warfare. Chemical, biological, radiological, and nuclear warfare, environment degradation, Carbon and Hope. Again, both are short films available on YouTube. It talks about VR and digital reality. It talks about transhumanism. It talks about time travel. It talks about dystopias. So these are just some of the viewings in front of you that you can go and engage with about what is going to happen in the future, or about zombies, clones, aliens, space exploration, impact of technology, VR, virtual reality, transhumanism, digital reality, etc., etc. Right? And then you have some novels, right? But right now, hang on. We have been doing this. I want all of you to maybe take a 5-minute break. I mean, this is too much information, so that information overload doesn't happen. Let's just stop right here for